Hi, I'm Shlor. I just want to say I hope you enjoyed this video, and I actually really enjoyed making this one because this actually made me see 5 a lot better, because I used to hate 5, but after playing it for this video, I enjoyed it a lot. So yeah, I hope you enjoy, and have a good day. While most players spent their time surviving inside the ruined theater of Kino der Toten, Treyarch had secretly included a second zombies map unlike anything the mode had seen before. By completing the Black Ops 1 campaign or entering the famous cheat code at the main menu, players unlocked the map 5, an entirely new survival experience set beneath one of the most recognizable buildings in the world, the Pentagon. Released alongside Call of Duty Black Ops 1 on November 2010, 5 immediately stood apart from every zombies map that had come before it. Rather than following the previous 4 characters mentioned, players instead assumed the roles of 4 real-world political figures: President John F. Kennedy, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, Cuban leader Fidel Castro, and former Secretary of Defense Richard Nixon. The decision seemed almost unbelievable at the time. Fewer players expected Treyarch to feature actual historical figures fighting alongside by side against the undead. Yet, through the clever writing and memorable dialogue, each character possessed a unique personality that perfectly captured the tone of the map. Kennedy delivered confident one-liners, Castro remained fearless in the face of danger, McNamara approached every situation analytically, and Nixon provided constant comedic relief. Their interactions helped make 5 one of the most memorable casts in Zombies history, despite appearing in one map. The events of 5 take place during the early 1960s at the height of the Cold War. As the world's political leaders gather inside of the Pentagon to discuss growing international tensions, an unexpected zombie outbreak appears and interrupts the meeting. Forced to set aside their political differences, the 4 leaders descend deeper into the underground facility complex in search of survival. Unlike Kino der Toten's theatrical atmosphere or Derice's abandoned laboratories, 5 embraced a sleek government facility filled with advanced technology, bright fluorescent lights, illuminated sterile hallways, computer terminals, lined secure offices, and military command centers stretched deep beneath the Pentagon. Although the environment initially appeared cleaner than previous Zombies map, players quickly discovered that the narrow corridors and confined spaces made survival far more dangerous. From the opening round, 5 establishes itself as one of the most difficult maps Treyarch had ever created. The starting room offered very little space to maneuver, while nearly every pathway throughout the Pentagon forces players into close-quarters combat. Escaping large groups of zombies often required quick decision-making rather than simple movement, and even experienced players found themselves overwhelmed far earlier than expected. One of the most major objectives involved restoring the power to the facility. After navigating through the lower levels of the Pentagon, players eventually reached the underground lavatories where activating the power switch unlocked perk machines, DEFCON controls, and one of the map's most unique mechanics, the teleporter system. Unlike the teleporters found on Derice and Kino der Toten, 5 featured a network of interconnected teleports, capable of transporting players between multiple floors of the facility almost instantly. Rather than serving only as a means of ascending to Pack-a-Punch machine, these teleporters became an essential part of surviving higher rounds. Players frequently relied on them to escape overwhelming situations, reposition themselves around the map, or rapidly assist a teammate in danger. One of the map's most interesting mechanics revolved around the DEFCON system. Located throughout the Pentagon were 5 security switches that players could activate after restoring power. Once every DEFCON switch had been enabled, the facility entered DEFCON 5, lowering security restrictions and granting temporary access to the hidden Pack-a-Punch laboratory. Unlike previous maps where Pack-a-Punch remained permanently available after being unlocked, 5 required players to repeatedly activate the DEFCON system throughout the match. This added another layer of strategy, forcing teams to coordinate movement across multiple floors while balancing survival against the desire to upgrade their weapon. Simply reaching the Pack-a-Punch often became a challenge in itself. Returning once again was the Pack-a-Punch machine, allowing players to transform ordinary weapons into significant more powerful variants. Familiar weapons such as the ray gun, RPK, HK-21, and AUG all became devastating tools after receiving upgraded damage, larger magazines, and improved performance. Choosing which weapon to upgrade became especially important due to the difficulty involved in repeatedly accessing the hidden laboratory. 5 also introduced one of the most iconic wonder weapons in Black Ops, the Winter's Howl. Rather than relying on electricity like the Wunderwaffe or concussive force similar to the Thundergun, the Winter's Howl unleashed freezing blasts capable of slowing and eventually shattering nearby zombies. Visually, the weapon stood apart from anything players had previously encountered, firing streams of icy energy that instantly covered enemies in frost. Although the weapon proved extremely effective during the early and middle rounds, players eventually discovered that its damage failed to scale effectively into higher rounds. As zombies' health continued increasing, the Winter's Howl gradually lost much of its killing power, leading many players to favor conventional pack-a-punch weapons instead. Despite these limitations, the Wonder Weapon remains one of the most visually distinctive creations in zombies' history, and continues to hold a special place among long-time fans. However, the mechanic that truly defined 5 every few rounds was the form of the Pentagon Thief. Rather than overwhelming players through sheer numbers, the Pentagon Thief presented an entirely different challenge. Appearing alone, the mysterious figure would sprint towards players in an attempt to steal their currently equipped weapon before disappearing into the facility. If successful, players were forced to chase him through the Pentagon before eliminating him to recover their weapons. This created one of the most unique bosses ever encountered in zombies. Instead of simply surviving another difficult enemy, players suddenly found themselves balancing offense, defense, and pursuit simultaneously. Losing a fully upgraded weapon could completely change the outcome of a map, making every Pentagon Thief round an intense test of awareness and teamwork. Successfully defeating the Pentagon Thief before he escaped rewarded players with a max ammo power-up, while permanently reducing Bob's. Successfully defeating the Pentagon Thief after stealing a weapon and retrieving the weapon, a max ammo would be granted to the player, and a fire sale would be granted to the player. This clever risk and reward system encouraged players to aggressively hunt the boss rather than simply avoid him, adding another strategic layer unlike anything seen in previous maps. As players continued mastering 5, they quickly realized that the map demanded a completely different approach than Keener der Toten. The wide-open theater that had allowed players to comfortably train large hordes was replaced by narrow offices, winding hallways, and multiple levels connected by elevators and teleporters. Every decision carried greater risk, and a simple mistake could simply end every game. Another thing to note about the Pentagon Thief is that when players would kill him before he could steal any weapon, the Pentagon Thief would drop a new power-up, this being the Bonfire Sale. The Bonfire Sale would make every teleporter on the map instantly teleport to the DEFCON Pack-a-Punch room. With this, Pack-a-Punch would only cost $1,000 for a set amount of time. One of the most recognizable locations within the Pentagon was the War Room. Situated in the center of the facility, this large circular command center became the map's primary training area. Unlike the cramped corridors surrounding it, the War Room offered enough open space for players to gather zombies into predictable groups before eliminating them with upgraded weapons or carefully timed wonder weapon blasts. However, surviving inside of the War Room was far from simple. 4 separate pathways allowed zombies to enter from nearly every direction, forcing players to remain constantly aware of their surroundings. Unlike Kino's stage, where players could often predict enemy movement, 5 demanded continuous adaptation. Experienced players memorized zombie spawn patterns, learned where to rotate around the room, and developed precise movement techniques that minimized the risk of danger. Another strategy eventually emerged around the elevators connecting each level of the Pentagon. By carefully timing elevator movement and coordinating with teammates, players can temporarily create safe routes through the facility or escape overwhelming situations. Although elevators were never intended to serve as defensive tools, creative players quickly incorporated them into increasingly advanced survival strategies. The Pentagon's interconnected design also rewarded players who understood efficient map navigation. Rather than remaining in a single location for the entire match, successful teams constantly rotated between floors, activating teleporters, refreshing Pack-a-Punch access, and repositioning themselves whenever zombies became too great. Movement became the defining skill of 5, separating experienced players from newcomers. The Pentagon Thief continued influencing strategy long after players learned how to defeat him. Since the thief always attempted to steal the weapon currently held by players, experienced survivors often switched to weaker secondary weapons before his revival. Doing so greatly reduced the consequence of being caught while protecting valuable Pack-a-Punch weapons from being stolen. Small decisions like these demonstrated just how strategic depth 5 possessed beneath its already demanding gameplay. Although the Winter's Howl received mixed opinions from the community, players gradually discovered several creative ways to maximize its usefulness. Rather than relying on its primary killing weapon, many survivors treated it as a support tool. Freezing large groups of zombies temporarily slowed their movement, creating opportunities to revive teammates, activate traps, or safely reposition around the map. While it never reached the legendary status of the Thundergun or Wonderwaff, the Winter's Howl still occupied an important role within 5's unique gameplay loop. The map also introduced another memorable trap in the form of the Pentagon's automated security systems. Electrical barriers and defensive mechanisms scattered throughout the facility allowed players to eliminate groups of zombies without consuming valuable ammo. During high rounds, experienced teams frequently incorporated these traps into carefully planned rotations, preserving ammunition for the increasingly dangerous later stages of the game. Beyond its gameplay innovation, 5 also stood apart because of its atmosphere. Rather than simply relying on horror, the map embraced political satire and Cold War tension. Hearing world leaders exchange sarcastic remarks while battling zombies created a tone unlike anything else in the franchise. Despite the absurd premise, the performances felt surprisingly believable, allowing the map to balance comedy with genuine suspense. The decision of featuring real-world historical figures was one of Treyarch's boldest creative risks. While the characters were fictionalized versions of the real-world counterparts, their inclusion immediately distinguished 5 from every other Zombies experience. Players who had spent years following the adventures of Ultimus suddenly found themselves fighting alongside John F. Kennedy, Fidel Castro, creating one of the most memorable introductions in the history of the mode. 5 also quietly expanded the growing zombie storyline. Hidden radios throughout the Pentagon revealed additional information regarding Project Nova, Group 935, and the scientific experiments occurring behind the scenes during the Cold War. While the map largely functioned as a standalone survival experience, these hidden recordings subtly connected 5 to the broader narrative unfolding from Black Ops Zombies. For dedicated lore enthusiasts, these radios provided another glimpse into the increasingly complicated relationship between governments, secret organizations, and Element 115. Treyarch continued demonstrating that the zombies outbreak was no longer isolated to a handful of abandoned facilities. Instead, it had become part of a global conspiracy involving world leaders, military research, and technologies far beyond humanity's understanding. Despite releasing alongside Kino der Toten, 5 quickly developed a very different reputation within the zombies community. While Kino became known as the perfect beginner map, 5 earned recognition as one of the most challenging experiences Treyarch had ever created. Many players who reached high rounds on Kino struggled to survive beyond round 20 inside the Pentagon. Rather than disencouraging players, this increased difficulty helped 5 develop an incredibly loyal fan base. Mastering the map became a badge of honor, requiring excellent communication, efficient resource management, and complete knowledge of the facility's layout. High round records on 5 were viewed with particular respect due to the map's relentless challenge and limited margin for error. Years later, Treyarch revisited the Pentagon by remaking 5 as classified in Call of Duty Black Ops 4. While the remake introduced updated visuals, expanded story elements, modern gameplay mechanics, the original map retained a special place within the community. Many longtime fans continued returning to the original version, appreciating both its unforgiving difficulty and the unique personality created by its unforgivable cast and political leaders. Looking back today, 5 represents one of Treyarch's most experimental zombies maps. It challenged nearly every expectation experienced by previous releases, replacing familiar characters with historical figures, introducing an entirely new boss mechanic, reimagining map traversal through teleporters and elevators, and demanding a level of teamwork rarely seen before. Although it was often overshadowed by Kino der Toten, 5 proved that Treyarch was willing to take creative risks rather than simply repeating successful formulas. For many players, that willingness to experiment is exactly what makes 5 so memorable. It remains one of the most difficult, distinctive, and rewarding maps in the entire franchise. While it may not possess the universal popularity that Kino der Toten does, it has its own ambitions, mechanics, and unforgetting setting, ensuring the Pentagon would earn its own lasting place in Zombies history.